My mother-in-law ruined my wedding dress with red wine. Oops, she whispered with a wicked grin. Every guest saw my humiliation. I disappeared for 20 minutes and came back with something that destroyed her reputation forever. I found the bank statements at 2:47 a.m., scattered across Lauren's mahogany desk like evidence of a crime. And that's exactly what they were. Sarah's medical fund withdrawal, $5,000. Another page. Withdrawal, $8,000. My hands shook as I flipped through month after month of stolen hope, stolen chances, stolen life. $23,000. Gone. While David's Aunt Sarah lay dying in a hospital bed, believing her family couldn't afford to save her. I'd only come to Lauren's house that night to pick up the centerpieces she'd insisted on fixing for our wedding. I'd used the spare key David gave me, expecting to grab the decorations and leave. Instead, I stumbled into a nightmare that made every cruel thing Lauren had done to me seem insignificant by comparison. The papers trembled in my hands as I read the final entry. Withdrawal, $2,000 wedding flowers upgrade. She had literally stolen money from her dying sister to make my wedding more elaborate. Not because she cared about my happiness, but because she wanted the perfect backdrop for whatever twisted plan she had brewing. Before we continue with this wedding day revenge, I want to thank you for joining me in sharing stories about standing up to toxic family members. If you believe victims deserve justice and bullies should face consequences, please consider subscribing. It's free and helps us reach more people who need to hear this. Now let's see how this unfolds. That's when I heard her voice drifting from the kitchen phone, crying, desperate, pathetic. Please, Margaret, you have to talk sense into David. That girl is going to ruin everything we've built. She's nothing but a gold-digging little tramp who trapped my son with her lies. My blood turned to ice as I realized she was talking about me. To David's favorite aunt. Planning something for our wedding day that would finally show everyone what Jessica really is. I pressed myself against the hallway wall, listening to her outline her strategy like a general planning a war. Every word carved itself into my memory, every detail adding to the picture of a woman so consumed with hatred that she'd steal from her own dying sister to fund her revenge. That night everything changed. I stopped being Lauren's victim and started becoming something far more dangerous. A woman with nothing left to lose and everything to prove. But this war had started much earlier, long before I discovered the depths of Lauren's cruelty. It began the night David slipped that engagement ring onto my finger and we decided to share our joy with his family. Romano's restaurant buzzed with the quiet elegance of old money and older secrets. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables where the city's elite discussed business deals over $100 steaks. It should have been perfect. A celebration of love in a place that reflected David's family's status and tradition. Instead, it became the opening battle in a war I didn't even know I was fighting. Lauren's eyes locked onto my ring before I'd even fully extended my hand. She'd been watching, waiting, like a spider in her web of perfectly applied makeup and designer clothes. The smile that spread across her face was beautiful and terrifying, like watching a predator bare its teeth. "How lovely," she purred, reaching for my hand with perfectly manicured nails that felt like claws against my skin. "David, darling, you certainly have unique taste." The pause before unique lasted just long enough for everyone at our table to notice. My parents, who'd been beaming with pride moments before, exchanged worried glances. David's father cleared his throat uncomfortably, recognizing the warning signs of his wife's particular brand of social warfare. But Lauren wasn't done. "Oh no, she was just getting started. I simply must get a closer look," she announced, producing a jeweler's loop from her Hermes purse with the flourish of a magician revealing a dove. "You wouldn't believe how many young men get taken advantage of by unscrupulous dealers these days." The restaurant seemed to quiet around us, other diners sensing drama unfolding at the corner table. I wanted to snatch my hand away, but Lauren's grip was firm, possessive, claiming ownership over even this moment that should have belonged to David and me. Through the loop, she examined my ring with the intensity of a detective studying evidence. The silence stretched until it became unbearable, until even the waiters stopped pretending not to stare. "Well," she finally announced, her voice carrying across half the restaurant, "it's certainly adequate. The clarity is a bit concerning and that inclusion near the pavilion is quite prominent, but I suppose when you're grateful for anything these details matter less." The words hit like physical blows. Adequate. Grateful for anything. In front of my parents, in front of a restaurant full of strangers, she just announced that my engagement ring, and by extension me, was substandard. A consolation prize. Something David had settled for. My mother's face crumpled with confusion and hurt. My father's jaw clenched so tight I could hear his teeth grinding. David started to protest, but Lauren silenced him with a raised hand and that smile that never reached her eyes. Now, darling, I'm just looking out for both of you. Some girls today are so demanding about carrots and settings, but Jessica here is clearly more practical. More grateful. It's actually quite refreshing. Grateful. She kept using that word like a weapon, each repetition cutting deeper than the last. Grateful implied I should be thankful for scraps, happy with leftovers, content with whatever David was willing to give his poor little charity case girlfriend. As conversations resumed around us and the waiter finally approached with our delayed champagne service, I realized this wasn't about a ring at all. This was Lauren's declaration of war. Her opening salvo in a campaign designed to make me understand that I would never be good enough for her son, her family, or their world. But as I sat there, smiling through the humiliation while Lauren continued her performance of the concerned mother-in-law, I made a promise to myself. She wanted a war? She was about to discover that some enemies fight back. And when they do, they fight to win. The gray clouds hanging over Rosewood Manor seemed like an omen as I stared out the bridal suite window at 6:30 a.m. Rain droplets clung to the glass like tears, and I couldn't shake the feeling that Lauren was somewhere in this beautiful venue, plotting my destruction with the same methodical precision she'd used to steal from her dying sister. My phone buzzed against the marble vanity. Kate, my maid of honor, was already in full crisis management mode despite the early hour. Just the florist just called. Someone changed your bouquet order to include funeral lilies. White ones. They're asking if we're sure about the memorial theme for today. My blood turned cold. Funeral lilies. On my wedding day. Lauren's message was crystal clear. She wanted my marriage to be dead on arrival. Get me the number for Bloom and Blossom, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Tell them we're switching florists immediately. And Kate? Don't mention this to anyone else. Not yet. As Kate hurried off to fix Lauren's latest sabotage attempt, I caught my reflection in the ornate mirror. My skin was pale, dark circles shadowing my eyes despite the concealer I'd applied. I looked like a woman preparing for battle, not a bride preparing for the happiest day of her life. The irony wasn't lost on me. Lauren had spent months turning my wedding into a war zone, and now I looked the part. My bridesmaids began arriving at 7, their cheerful chatter filling the suite like birdsong after a storm. Sarah, my sister, bounced in with coffee and pastries, followed by my college roommates Emma and Rachel, who immediately started unpacking enough makeup to supply a Broadway production. You look nervous, Emma observed, studying my face with the sharp eye of someone who'd known me for 8 years. Pre-wedding jitters or something else? Before I could answer, Maria, our photographer, knocked softly on the door. Her usually bright smile was replaced by a worried frown that made my stomach clench. Jessica, could I speak with you privately for a moment? I followed her into the hallway, my bare feet silent on the plush carpeting. Maria glanced around nervously before leaning close. I need to tell you something about your mother-in-law. She approached me this morning while I was setting up equipment in the ceremony space. She offered to pay me an extra $1,000 to capture unflattering angles of you during the ceremony and reception. The words hit me like ice water. What exactly did she say? She said she wanted photos that showed your true character, and that the family would appreciate having honest documentation of today. When I refused, she got angry. Really angry. She told me I was being unprofessional and that she'd make sure I never worked another wedding in this city. Maria's hands trembled slightly as she continued. She also tried to get into the photo booth area early, claiming she wanted to organize the props better. But I caught her trying to replace your custom signs with ones that had different messages. Crude ones. I stopped her, but she got hostile and demanding. I closed my eyes, processing this latest attack. Lauren wasn't just planning to humiliate me. She was trying to ensure that humiliation would be permanently documented. She wanted photos that would make me look terrible and photo booth images that would embarrass my family for years to come. Maria, thank you for telling me. And thank you for protecting my day. I won't forget this. As I returned to the bridal suite, my phone rang again. The caterer. My heart sank before I even answered. Miss Jessica? I'm calling about the menu changes your mother-in-law requested this morning. She said the family has specific dietary restrictions we weren't told about, and she's asking us to switch to a completely different meal plan. The problem is we don't have those ingredients on hand, and it would mean serving your guests something much simpler than what you ordered. I gripped the phone tighter. What specifically did she request? Basic chicken and vegetables. No seasoning beyond salt and pepper. She said the family has sensitive digestive systems and that anything else would be inappropriate for such a traditional celebration. Lauren was trying to turn my elegant wedding reception into a bland, forgettable meal that would leave our guests disappointed and talking about the poor planning for months. Ignore her completely, I said firmly. Serve exactly what we ordered. If she has issues with the food, she doesn't have to eat it. No sooner had I hung up than Marcus, our DJ, knocked on the door. I didn't even need to ask. His apologetic expression told me everything. Let me guess. Lauren. She wants to change your first dance song. Says, Perfect, by Ed Sheeran is too contemporary for such a traditional family, and she's requesting we play something classical instead. She also wants to remove about half your playlist because it's not appropriate for mixed company. Each attempted change felt like another small death, another piece of my dream wedding that Lauren was trying to steal. But something strange was happening. Instead of feeling defeated, I was getting angry. Really angry. And anger I was discovering made me sharp. Marcus, here's what's going to happen. You're going to play every single song on our original playlist. If Lauren approaches you again, you refer her to me. If she becomes difficult, you call venue security. Are we clear? His relieved smile told me I'd said exactly what he needed to hear. Crystal clear. And Jessica? Good for you. I've worked hundreds of weddings and I've never seen anything like this. As the morning progressed, the attacks continued. The makeup artist mentioned that someone had called asking her to use more natural tones that would better suit my complexion. Code for making me look washed out. The hairstylist had received a request to style my hair in a more conservative updo that would hide my face. Even the minister had been contacted with concerns about my readiness for such a sacred commitment. Each incident was small, seemingly innocent when viewed alone. But together they painted a picture of a woman so determined to destroy my wedding day that she was willing to corrupt every vendor, every moment, every detail. By 11 a.m., my bridesmaids had noticed the pattern of phone calls and whispered conversations. Kate pulled me aside as the makeup artist worked on my eyes. Jess, what's really going on? These aren't normal last-minute changes. I met her gaze in the mirror, seeing my own reflection surrounded by the concerned faces of the women who loved me most. These friends had watched me plan this wedding for months, had seen my excitement about every detail Lauren was now trying to destroy. Lauren's trying to sabotage everything, I said quietly. She's been planning this for months. Emma's mouth fell open. But why would she? Because she hates me. She's hated me since the night David proposed, and today is her chance to prove to everyone that I'm not good enough for her son. The room fell silent except for the soft brush of makeup against my skin. My friends exchanged glances, and I could see the moment they shifted from wedding party mode into protective mode. What do you need us to do? Sarah asked, her voice carrying the fierce loyalty that only a sister could provide. Help me get ready. Help me look beautiful. And help me get through today without letting her win. As noon approached and my wedding dress was carefully lifted from its hanger, I felt something settling into place inside me. Lauren thought she was hunting a helpless victim, but she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd given me all morning to prepare for war. The silk of my wedding dress rustled like whispered promises as David and I walked down the aisle together for the first time as husband and wife. Rose petals danced in the air above us, catching the late afternoon sunlight that had finally broken through the morning's gray clouds. Every face in the packed ceremony space beamed with joy and love. Every face except one. Lauren stood in the front row, her hands moving in mechanical applause that looked more like a slow clap of condemnation than celebration. Her smile was perfectly practiced, the kind she'd perfected at decades of charity galas and social functions, but her eyes held something cold and calculating that made my stomach twist despite the overwhelming happiness of the moment. You did it, David whispered against my ear as we paused at the back of the ceremony space, his voice thick with emotion. You're officially stuck with me now, Mrs. Mitchell. I laughed, the sound bright and genuine for the first time in months. For 45 minutes, Lauren had been forced to sit quietly and watch her son choose me over her objections. She'd had to listen to him promise to love, honor, and cherish me in front of 200 witnesses. She'd had to watch him slip my grandmother's ring onto my finger and declare me his wife. But as photographer Maria began organizing us for post-ceremony photos, I caught Lauren checking her watch with the urgency of someone monitoring a countdown timer. When she thought no one was looking, she pulled out her phone and sent a quick text, her fingers moving with practiced efficiency. "Where are you going, Mom?" David called as Lauren suddenly stepped away from the family grouping. "Just checking on the reception details, sweetheart," she replied, her voice syrupy sweet. "I want everything to be perfect for your special day." She disappeared into the manor house, her heels clicking against the stone pathway with military precision. 20 minutes passed before she returned, and when she did, there was something different about her demeanor. The nervous energy that had surrounded her all morning was gone, replaced by an unsettling calm that reminded me of the eye of a hurricane. The cocktail hour unfolded like a fairy tale despite my growing unease. String quartet music drifted across the terrace as guests mingled among the perfectly manicured gardens, champagne glasses catching the golden light. David's college roommate regaled a group with the story of how David had practiced proposing to his bathroom mirror for 3 weeks before getting the courage to ask me. My sorority sisters surrounded my mother, gushing over photos from my childhood that she'd brought to share. Even Lauren seemed to be playing the part of the gracious mother-in-law, posing for photos with relatives and accepting congratulations on her son's marriage. But I noticed she kept gravitating toward the bar area, engaging the bartender in what appeared to be detailed conversations. "Everything okay?" Kate asked, appearing at my elbow with her maid of honor radar finely tuned to my stress levels. "Just watching Lauren," I murmured, nodding toward where she stood chatting with the bartender while gesturing toward various wine bottles. Kate followed my gaze, her expression darkening. "Want me to go see what she's talking about?" Before I could answer, the wedding coordinator appeared to announce that dinner was ready to be served. Guests began flowing toward the reception hall, their cheerful chatter echoing off the manor's stone walls. David took my hand, squeezing gently as we prepared to make our grand entrance as husband and wife. The reception hall looked like something from a magazine spread. Candlelight flickered from crystal votives on each table, casting dancing shadows across cream-colored linens. The centerpieces, rescued from Lauren's funeral lily sabotage attempt, were elegant arrangements of white roses and baby's breath that seemed to glow in the soft lighting. Our sweetheart table sat elevated on a small platform, giving us a perfect view of our guests and, unfortunately, giving them a perfect view of us. As David and I took our seats to thunderous applause, Lauren made a deliberate show of approaching our table. "My beautiful daughter-in-law," she announced loudly enough for nearby tables to hear, her arms spread wide in an embrace that felt more like a trap closing around me. "You look absolutely radiant." Her fingers traced along the delicate beadwork of my dress bodice, the touch lingering uncomfortably long. "This silk is exquisite," she continued, her voice carrying a strange note of fascination. "So delicate, so pure. It would be absolutely impossible to clean if anything happened to it." David's father shifted uncomfortably in his seat, clearly recognizing something off in his wife's behavior, but David himself just smiled indulgently. "Mom, you're being dramatic again." "Am I?" Lauren's laugh tinkled like breaking glass. "I just want everything to stay perfect for Jessica. Some moments can't be undone, can't be fixed no matter how much money you throw at them." As dinner service began and David's best man, Trevor, stood to deliver his toast, Lauren positioned herself directly behind my chair. I could feel her presence like heat from a fire, could smell her expensive perfume mixing with something else. Wine. She held a glass of deep red Cabernet Sauvignon, the liquid so dark it looked almost black in the candlelight. Trevor's voice filled the reception hall as he spoke about true love and life partnerships, about how he'd watched David transform from a carefree bachelor into a man ready to build a future with the woman he adored. The guests laughed at his funny stories and grew misty-eyed during his more sentimental moments. But I couldn't focus on the words. All my attention was fixed on Lauren behind me, the way she kept shifting her weight, moving closer with each of Trevor's sentences. Kate, seated at the head table, had noticed too. Her eyes kept darting between Lauren and me, her expression growing more concerned by the minute. "And so I raise my glass," Trevor concluded, his voice warm with emotion, "to true love conquering all obstacles and to David and Jessica who prove that sometimes the best things in life are worth fighting for." The room erupted in applause and raised glasses. That's when Lauren made her move. She stepped forward as if overcome with emotion, as if Trevor's words about fighting for love had inspired her to embrace her new daughter-in-law. Her heel caught, or appeared to catch, on the leg of my chair with theatrical precision. Time slowed to a crawl as she stumbled forward with Academy Award-worthy clumsiness, her glass tilting toward me like a weapon finding its target. The Cabernet Sauvignon poured down the front of my dress in a crimson waterfall, soaking through the delicate silk and spreading across the intricate beadwork like spilled blood. The reception hall fell into shocked silence. 200 guests watched the dark stains spread across my white gown, watched me sit frozen in horror as wine dripped from the bodice onto my hands, my lap, my shoes. "Oh my God!" Lauren gasped, her voice carrying perfectly across the silent room. "Oh Jessica, I'm so sorry. How clumsy of me." She immediately began dabbing at the stain with her napkin, each touch spreading the wine deeper into the silk fibers, making the damage worse while appearing to help. Guests gasped and murmured. My mother rose from her seat with tears already forming in her eyes, and David leaped up to comfort me. But as Lauren leaned close ostensibly to assess the damage, she brought her lips near my ear. Under the cover of the chaos she'd created, she whispered two words that cut through my shock like a blade. "Oops." Her grin was wicked, triumphant, the smile of someone who'd just executed a plan months in the making. This wasn't an accident. This was Lauren's masterpiece. A public humiliation designed to stain not just my dress, but the memory of this day forever. Standing there in my ruined gown, wine still dripping onto the floor, I felt something fundamental shift inside me. The scared, defensive woman who'd spent months documenting Lauren's cruelty was gone. In her place stood someone far more dangerous, a bride with nothing left to lose and a plan of her own to execute. "I need a few minutes to assess the damage," I announced to the room, my voice carrying with surprising steadiness despite the wine still dripping from my bodice. The reception hall remained frozen in uncomfortable silence, 200 pairs of eyes watching my every move. "I'll be right back." David immediately stood, his face etched with concern and barely contained fury at his mother. "I'll come with you, help you." "No." I placed my hand gently on his chest, feeling his rapid heartbeat beneath the fabric of his tuxedo. "Stay here. Keep our guests entertained. This is our wedding day and I won't let anything ruin it for them." I kissed his cheek softly, whispering close to his ear so only he could hear, "Everything's going to be fine. Trust me." Kate was already moving toward me, her maid of honor instincts kicking into high gear, but I caught her eye and gave her the slightest shake of my head. "Not yet. I needed to handle this next part alone." The walk from the reception hall to the bridal suite felt like a march to execution, except I wasn't the one who would be dying today. My heels clicked against the marble floors with steady, determined rhythm, each step echoing through the manor's corridors like a countdown timer. Once inside the bridal suite, I locked the door behind me and moved with purpose to my emergency bag. Kate arrived moments later, finding me not sobbing over my ruined dress as she'd expected, but methodically pulling items from the carefully packed kit I'd assembled months ago. My phone, backup makeup, and most importantly, the small leather notebook where I'd documented every cruel word, every manipulation, every theft. "Jess, what are you doing?" Kate's voice was sharp with concern. "We need to get you cleaned up, maybe see if there's anything we can do about the stain." "Kate." I looked up from my preparations, meeting her eyes with a calm that seemed to unnerve her more than tears would have. "I need you to go back to the reception. Make sure Lauren doesn't leave. She tries to go anywhere, create a distraction. Spill a drink, start a conversation, trip over your own feet if you have to. Just keep her there." "What are you planning?" I stood slowly, smoothing down the wine-stained silk of my dress with steady hands. "I'm going to give Lauren exactly what she deserves. And I need you to trust me." Kate studied my face for a long moment, reading something there that made her nod slowly. "How long do you need?" 20 minutes. Maybe less." The moment Kate left, I activated the plan I'd hoped I'd never have to use. My fingers moved across my phone screen with the precision of a surgeon, dialing the first number from my carefully curated contact list. Airscript Aviation, this is Jake. Jake, it's Jessica Mitchell. It's time. The pause on the other end was brief but loaded with understanding. 3 weeks ago, when I'd first contacted the skywriting company, Jake had thought I was insane. A bride hiring a skywriter as insurance against wedding day sabotage seemed like something out of a soap opera. But my deposit had been substantial enough to guarantee his silence and his services. Weather conditions are perfect, he confirmed, his voice professional despite the unusual nature of the request. Message will be, Lauren stole $20,000 from her sister's cancer fund, correct? Correct. How long until it's visible over the venue? 15 minutes. Maybe less with these wind conditions. I ended the call and immediately dialed the second number. Marcus, our DJ, answered on the first ring, probably expecting a song request or timing update for the dinner service. Marcus, it's Jessica. I have a special surprise for the reception. I need you to be ready to play some audio files from my phone through the sound system. His hesitation was immediate. Audio files? What kind of? The contract we signed includes provisions for special requests from the bride, I reminded him, my voice taking on the steel that months of dealing with Lauren had taught me to summon. This qualifies. I quickly transferred the audio files I'd been collecting since the engagement. Lauren's venomous voicemails where she called me names that would make a sailor blush, where she begged David to reconsider marrying me, where she detailed her plans to make my life miserable until I came to my senses and left her son alone. The most damning recording was from 2 weeks ago, a 15-minute drunken rant where Lauren outlined her wedding day sabotage plans in explicit detail. She'd been so confident in her righteousness, so certain that no one would ever challenge her, that she'd documented her own cruelty. Marcus's sharp intake of breath told me he'd listened to enough of the first file to understand what I was asking him to do. Oh my God, Jessica. Are you absolutely sure about this? I've never been more sure of anything in my life. Be ready for my signal. The third call was the hardest but also the most necessary. Dr. Morrison had been Sarah's oncologist for 3 years, watching her fight cancer with the kind of courage that made you believe in the resilience of the human spirit. When I'd first contacted him about the missing funds from Sarah's treatment account, he'd been skeptical but thorough in his investigation. Dr. Morrison, it's Jessica Mitchell. I'm giving you permission to call Robert immediately with your findings about Sarah's account. The pause stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone who'd seen too much human cruelty disguised as family loyalty. Jessica, you understand what this will do? This will destroy their marriage. Robert will never forgive her. I looked at myself in the ornate mirror, wine staining my wedding dress like spilled blood, and thought about Sarah lying in that hospital bed 3 weeks ago. Sarah, who'd apologized to her family for being such a financial burden. Sarah, who died believing her family couldn't afford to save her when the money had been there all along. She destroyed that marriage herself when she chose stealing from her dying sister over helping her live. Make the call. With my 3 strategic strikes launched, I had approximately 10 minutes before the dominoes would begin falling. I moved to the mirror and began touching up my makeup, not to hide evidence of crying. I hadn't shed a single tear, but to ensure I looked composed and in control when I returned to face Lauren. This wasn't about looking like a victim anymore. This was about looking like a woman who'd just declared war and was confident in her victory. My phone buzzed with the first update. Message complete. Flying over venue now. Clear skies, perfect visibility. Jake. The second text arrived 30 seconds later. Called Robert. Confirmed theft amounts. He's devastated but wants the truth made public. Heading to venue now. Dr. Morrison. I smoothed my hands over my wine-stained dress one final time, feeling the weight of months of documentation in my clutch, the small recording device still hidden in what remained of my bouquet, and the absolute certainty that justice was about to be served. As I walked back toward the reception hall, I could already hear the change in the guests' conversations. Excited murmurs, people pointing toward windows, the kind of buzz that happens when something unexpected captures everyone's attention. Lauren's oops was about to cost her everything she'd spent 40 years building. And I was ready to watch it all come crashing down. The reception hall buzzed with a different energy as I stepped through the ornate doorway, my wine-stained dress rustling with each deliberate step. Guests who had been seated for dinner were now clustered near the floor-to-ceiling windows, their conversations animated and confused as they pointed toward something in the sky. "Is that skywriting?" I heard my cousin Amanda ask her husband, shielding her eyes against the late afternoon sun. "At a wedding?" he replied, squinting upward. "That's unusual." The first letters were already taking shape in perfect white smoke against the brilliant blue sky that had finally emerged from the morning's gray clouds. L-U-R-E-N. The script was elegant, professional, impossible to miss from our elevated position at Rosewood Manor. I moved through the crowd with calm purpose, noting how conversations began shifting from confused curiosity to focused attention. More guests noticed the aerial display, nudging their tablemates and pointing skyward. The catering staff paused in their dinner service, servers holding plates of the perfectly prepared meal Lauren had tried to sabotage that morning. Lauren herself remained blissfully unaware of the developing situation. She stood near the bar area, holding court with David's elderly aunts and some family friends, probably regaling them with her version of the tragic accident with my dress. Her posture radiated satisfaction, shoulders back, chin lifted, the bearing of a woman who believed she just scored a decisive victory in a war her opponent didn't even know they were fighting. But as the next word began forming in the sky, "Phew," the tenor of the room changed dramatically. Conversations died to whispers, then to complete silence as guests realized they were witnessing something unprecedented. Lauren's laugh cut through the quiet, too loud and too bright as she continued her performance for the relatives surrounding her. "Oh, you should have seen poor Jessica's face when I accidentally bumped into her," she was saying, her voice carrying across the now silent room. "Sometimes these little accidents teach us important lessons about." Her words died in her throat as she followed the horrified gazes of her audience toward the windows. The color drained from her perfectly made-up face as she saw $20,000, appearing in bold white letters across the sky. Her mouth opened and closed wordlessly like a fish gasping for air. "What is that?" David's great-aunt Eleanor asked, her voice shaky with confusion. "What does it say about Lauren?" By the time from her sisters began forming, Lauren was frantically scanning the room, her eyes wild with panic as she searched for whoever could be responsible for this public exposure. When her gaze found me standing calmly near the head table, still wearing my stained dress like armor, something desperate and dangerous flickered across her features. I caught Marcus's eye across the room and gave him the subtle nod we'd arranged. He was positioned behind his DJ booth, his face pale but determined as he understood what I was asking him to do. His hands moved over his equipment with professional precision as he smoothly transitioned from the soft background dinner music to his microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus announced, his voice carrying clearly through the professional sound system, "the bride has a special message to share with everyone." The reception hall fell into absolute silence. 200 guests turned their attention from the sky to the speakers, expecting perhaps a thank you speech or an update about my dress situation. Instead, Lauren's own voice filled the room with crystal clarity, every word distinct and damning. "Jessica, you manipulative little gold digger, I know exactly what you're after. My son deserves better than some nobody who thinks she can waltz into our family and take what isn't hers." The collective gasp that rippled through the crowd was audible. Guests looked between the speakers and Lauren, their faces registering shock, confusion, and growing understanding. Lauren herself had gone completely white, her hands pressed against her mouth as if she could somehow stop the words that had already been spoken. "Turn it off," she shrieked, lunging toward Marcus's booth. "Turn it off right now. Those are private conversations." But Marcus had positioned himself strategically, and several of David's groomsmen stepped subtly into Lauren's path, preventing her from reaching the equipment. The second voicemail began playing, Lauren's recorded voice detailing her elaborate plans to make Jessica so miserable she'll leave David before their first anniversary. David stood frozen beside our sweetheart table, his face cycling through emotions I'd never seen before: confusion, horror, recognition, and finally, devastating understanding. This was his mother's voice, his mother's words, his mother's months-long campaign of psychological warfare against the woman he loved. The third recording was the most damning, Lauren's drunken confession from 2 weeks ago, her voice slurred but her intentions crystal clear as she described her surveillance of me, her study of my weaknesses, her determination to expose what she called my fortune-hunting nature. The vulgar names she called me echoed through the reception hall, each word hitting the stunned audience like a physical blow. I've been watching her, studying her weaknesses. She thinks she's so perfect, but I'll show everyone what she really is. A fortune-hunting tramp who trapped my son with fake pregnancy scares and emotional manipulation. Elderly relatives covered their mouths in shock. Some of the younger guests pulled out their phones, probably recording this unprecedented family meltdown. My mother sat at her table with tears streaming down her face, finally understanding the months of subtle cruelty I'd endured in silence. But it was the final recording that broke the room completely. Lauren's voice, casual and callous, discussing her theft from Sarah's medical fund with the detachment of someone balancing a checkbook. I've been borrowing money from Sarah's medical fund. She's going to die anyway and funerals are expensive. She'll never know the difference, and it's not like that experimental treatment would actually work. The silence that followed was deafening. Outside, the skywriting message was now complete. Lauren stole $20,000 from her sister's cancer fund. Inside, 200 wedding guests had just heard Lauren admit to stealing money from her dying sister. Money that could have saved Sarah's life. The pieces clicked together for everyone simultaneously. Sarah, David's beloved aunt who had died just 3 weeks ago, had spent her final days apologizing to the family for being such a financial burden. She died believing they couldn't afford to help her, when Lauren had stolen her lifeline to fund wedding decorations and personal shopping sprees. Several guests began crying openly. Others stared at Lauren with expressions of pure revulsion. David's grandfather, a World War II veteran who rarely showed emotion, had tears streaming down his weathered cheeks as he processed the betrayal of his granddaughter. Lauren finally found her voice, launching into a desperate attempt at damage control that only made everything worse. "Those recordings are fake," she screamed, her composed mask completely shattered. "Jessica manipulated them somehow. She's been planning this revenge because she knew I saw through her act." But her protest sounded hollow and desperate against the evidence of her own voice. She tried approaching different groups of guests, her hands gesturing wildly as she insisted there was another explanation for everything, that she could clarify the misunderstanding, if people would just listen to her side. No one would meet her eyes. The skywriting message remained clearly visible overhead, and her own recorded words had condemned her more thoroughly than any accusation I could have made. As she became more frantic, more desperate, her decades-long performance of respectability completely crumbled. The room watched in horrified fascination as the real Lauren emerged, manipulative, cruel, and desperate enough to steal from her own dying sister. And through it all, I stood quietly in my wine-stained dress, watching justice unfold with the satisfaction of a woman who had finally stopped being a victim. The ringing of Robert's phone cut through the shocked murmurs like a church bell tolling for the dead. Lauren's husband of 40 years stood near the head table, his weathered hand trembling as he looked at the caller ID displaying Dr. Morrison in bold letters. The entire reception hall seemed to hold its breath as Robert answered the call, his voice barely audible over the ambient sounds of clinking glasses and hushed conversations. But in the unnatural quiet that had settled over our wedding reception, every word carried with devastating clarity. "Dr. Morrison? Yes, this is Robert." His face, already pale from the skywriting revelation and audio recordings, went completely gray. "Are you certain about the amounts?" Lauren, who had been frantically trying to convince David's cousins that the recordings were somehow fabricated, froze mid-sentence. Her head snapped toward her husband with the sharp attention of a predator sensing danger. 3 weeks ago? Robert's voice cracked slightly. She needed how much more for the treatment? The pause that followed lasted an eternity. Guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats, sensing they were witnessing something far more devastating than a family disagreement. This was the complete unraveling of a life built on lies. "I see. Thank you for calling, Doctor. Yes, I understand the legal implications." When Robert ended the call, the silence was so complete I could hear my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. He stood there for a moment, phone still pressed to his ear, as if holding on to those final seconds before his world changed forever. "Lauren." His voice cut through the stillness like a blade finding its target. She turned toward him, her face a mask of desperate hope and barely contained panic. "Robert, darling, whatever that doctor told you, there's an explanation. Dr. Morrison just confirmed it." Robert's words fell like stones into still water, each one sending ripples of shock through the assembled guests. You stole $23,000 from Sarah's treatment fund. She died 3 weeks ago because she couldn't afford the experimental therapy that might have saved her life. The collective gasp from 200 wedding guests was audible, a sound of pure horror as the full scope of Lauren's betrayal became clear. This wasn't just theft. This was murder by neglect, the willful destruction of hope for the most vulnerable member of their family. Robert began walking toward Lauren with the measured pace of a man approaching his own execution. Each step seemed to age him a decade, 40 years of marriage crumbling beneath his feet like autumn leaves. Sarah called me 2 days before she died, he said, his voice carrying across the reception hall with the weight of absolute devastation. She apologized for being such a financial burden on the family. She said she understood why we couldn't help with the experimental treatment. Lauren tried to interrupt, her mouth opening to offer explanations or denials. But Robert's raised hand silenced her with the authority of a man who had finally seen through decades of manipulation. She died thinking we didn't love her enough to try to save her, Robert continued, his voice breaking as tears began streaming down his cheeks. She spent her last days feeling guilty for asking for help, when you had stolen her lifeline to feed your shopping addiction and your need to control everyone around you. Lauren reached toward him desperately, her perfectly manicured hands grasping for connection, for forgiveness, for any chance to salvage what remained of her carefully constructed world. Robert, please let me explain. Don't touch me. He stepped back as if she were contaminated, as if 40 years of shared memories had become toxic in an instant. I don't know who you are anymore. I don't think I ever did. The guests watched in horrified fascination as a marriage that had survived 4 decades, raised children, weathered countless storms, died in real time before their eyes. This wasn't just divorce. This was the complete annihilation of everything Robert thought he knew about the woman he'd shared his life with. What happened next burned itself into my memory with the clarity of a photograph. Robert, this dignified man who had loved Lauren through everything, looked down at his wedding ring, the simple gold band that had circled his finger for 40 years. And then his gaze moved to the elaborate chocolate fountain that Lauren had insisted we include in our reception. You wanted everything to be perfect and expensive, he said quietly, his voice carrying a finality that made even the catering staff stop their cleanup to listen. So here's your perfect ending. With deliberate ceremony, Robert pulled the gold band from his finger and held it up for everyone to see. The ring caught the light from the crystal chandeliers, gleaming one last time before its destruction. The chocolate fountain continued its elegant cascade, 3 tiers of flowing dark chocolate that had been the centerpiece of Lauren's vision for our reception. Robert drew back his arm and hurled the ring directly into the flowing chocolate with the force of a man casting off 40 years of lies. The splash sent dark chocolate spraying across the pristine white tablecloth, droplets spattering onto nearby guests who didn't even attempt to move away from the spectacle. The ring disappeared into the swirling pool of chocolate, lost forever in the sweet confection that had cost more than some people's monthly rent. The symbolism was perfect and terrible. Their marriage, like the ring, was now irretrievably lost in the mess Lauren had created. As her husband walked away without looking back, Lauren's composure finally shattered completely. She lunged toward the chocolate fountain like a woman possessed, her designer mother-of-the-groom dress trailing behind her as she fell to her knees beside the elaborate display. Robert, please. I can explain everything. The money was just borrowed. I was going to pay it back. Her voice rose to a shriek as she plunged her hands into the flowing chocolate, frantically searching for the ring as if retrieving it could somehow undo the devastation of the last hour. But her protests fell on ears that had heard enough lies for one lifetime. Guests began filing out of the reception, many of them crying. For Sarah, for Robert, for the family that had just been destroyed by one woman's greed and cruelty. Lauren's perfectly styled hair fell around her face as chocolate stained her expensive dress, her manicured nails scraping against the fountain's base in desperate search of redemption that would never come. The woman who had tried to humiliate me with a wine stain was now publicly degrading herself in ways I never could have orchestrated. David stood beside me, his arm around my waist, whispering apologies and promises that we would get through this together. But as I watched Lauren's complete breakdown, I felt no satisfaction in her suffering, only a profound sense of justice finally being served. As David's uncle finally escorted Lauren from the venue, her chocolate-stained dress and wild hair making her look like a madwoman, She turned back to scream one final accusation. This is all Jessica's fault. She orchestrated this whole disaster because she knew I saw through her act. But no one was listening anymore. The truth had been revealed, justice had been served, and Lauren's reign of terror was finally over. Standing there in my wine-stained wedding dress, surrounded by the people who truly loved us, I realized that Lauren's attempt to destroy my perfect day had instead given me something far more valuable: the perfect revenge served with devastating precision. If this story of wedding day revenge had you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Robert threw his wedding ring into the chocolate fountain, ending 40 years of marriage in one devastating moment. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more thrilling stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.